The gas station at the edge of town, known locally as Station 13, had been around for decades. Nestled in the middle of a desolate stretch of highway, it was a solitary beacon in an otherwise unending expanse of darkness. People in town whispered about it, stories of strange occurrences, inexplicable disappearances, and things best left unspoken. But for Ethan, a college student desperate for extra cash, the night shift seemed like an easy paycheck. Ethan's first night started uneventfully. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, casting a sickly yellow glow over the store. The shelves were stocked with the usual snacks, drinks, and motor oil. Outside, the pumps gleamed under the fluorescent canopy. It was eerily quiet, with only the hum of the cooler and the occasional rustling of wind outside to break the silence. Around midnight, as Ethan scrolled through his phone, the first oddity occurred. The old landline phone behind the counter rang. Startled, Ethan picked it up. "Station 13, he said hesitantly. There was silence on the other end. Then a faint, raspy whisper, "Don't let them in." "Hello? Who is this?" Ethan asked, but the line went dead. He stared at the receiver, his heart pounding. Shaking it off as a prank, he placed the phone back and returned to scrolling. But the unease lingered. At 12:45 a.m., the station's automated door slid open with a soft chime. Ethan glanced up, expecting a customer. No one was there. He stepped out from behind the counter and peered outside. The highway was empty, the surrounding darkness impenetrable. As he turned back, he froze. The security camera monitor behind the counter showed a figure standing at pump 3. The figure was tall and cloaked in shadow, their features obscured. Ethan hadn't heard a car pull up, and the figure didn't appear to have a vehicle. He grabbed the microphone for the intercom. "Hey! Can I help you?" The figure didn't move. Ethan squinted at the monitor. The longer he stared, the more distorted the image became. The figure's outline shimmered and warped, as though the camera itself couldn't fully capture its presence. Suddenly, the lights above pump 3 flickered and went out. When they came back on, the figure was gone. Ethan's stomach churned. He debated calling his manager but decided against it. The last thing he wanted was to sound like he couldn't handle a simple night shift. Instead, he grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside to investigate. The night air was cold and carried an unnatural stillness. Ethan shone his flashlight around the pumps, finding nothing unusual. As he turned to head back inside, he noticed something on the ground. A single, wet footprint, bare, human, and impossibly large, led away from pump 3 and into the darkness beyond the station's lights. Ethan hurried back inside, locking the doors behind him. He tried to focus on his phone, but the unease was overwhelming. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind outside made him jump. At 2:13 a.m., the power went out. The station was plunged into darkness, save for the faint glow of the emergency exit signs. Ethan cursed under his breath and fumbled for his flashlight. As he turned it on, the beam illuminated the aisles, revealing nothing out of the ordinary. Then came the knocking. It was soft at first, like someone tapping gently on the glass door. Ethan's flashlight beam wavered as he turned it toward the entrance. A figure stood just outside, their face obscured by the glare of the light. "We're closed," Ethan shouted, his voice cracking. The figure didn't respond. They just stood there, unmoving. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't just at the door anymore, it came from the windows, the walls, even the ceiling. It surrounded him. Ethan backed up, his breathing ragged. The flashlight flickered, and for a brief moment, the figure outside seemed to multiply. There were dozens of them now, all identical, all standing perfectly still. The landline rang again. Ethan nearly dropped the flashlight as he grabbed the receiver. "Don't let them in," the voice whispered again. This time, it was clearer, more urgent. "Who are you? What's happening?" Ethan demanded. But the line went dead once more. The knocking stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. Ethan held his breath, his eyes darting around the room. He felt as though he was being watched. The flashlight flickered again, and in that brief strobe of light, he saw them. Figures standing in the aisles, their faces blank and featureless. They didn't move, but their presence was suffocating. Ethan backed toward the storeroom, slamming the door shut behind him. He barricaded it with boxes and shelving, his hands trembling. His phone had no signal, and the emergency radio was dead. He was completely alone. Or so he thought. A soft, wet sound came from the corner of the storeroom. Ethan turned his flashlight toward it. The beam illuminated a puddle of dark liquid spreading across the floor. From the puddle, something began to rise. It was humanoid but grotesque, its limbs too long, its movements jerky and unnatural. Its head tilted toward him, though it had no eyes to see. Ethan screamed, throwing whatever he could find at the creature. It advanced slowly, methodically, as though savoring his terror. Desperate, Ethan flung open the storeroom's back door and ran into the night. The highway was empty, the darkness oppressive. Ethan sprinted down the road, not daring to look back. The gas station's lights grew smaller and smaller until they vanished entirely. When a truck finally pulled over to help him hours later, Ethan was incoherent, his words a jumble of fear and disbelief. The driver took him to the nearest hospital, where he was treated for shock. He tried to explain what had happened, but no one believed him. The police found nothing unusual at Station 13, though they noted that the security footage was inexplicably corrupted. Ethan never returned to the gas station. He left town shortly after, but the nightmares followed him. In the darkest hours of the night, he still hears the knocking, the raspy voice on the phone, and the wet footsteps behind him. Station 13 remains open, its fluorescent lights a beacon for weary travelers. But those who know its history avoid it, whispering warnings to anyone who will listen. Don't let them in. I don't know how to start this, I'm still in shock. Like they say, it's best to start from the beginning. I'm a salesman, I sell fax machines, talk about a dying industry, but it pays surprisingly well. I travel the country with Darren, he's not my boss, but my senior. I do the tech demo, hardly modern technology and not very taxing, and he does the commercials. We live quite far away from each other, but as our meetings are usually London way, I pick him up and drive the remainder of the journey together, but yesterday we were late. I hated being late, there's nothing worse than a bad first impression. Presentation comes first, always wear a suit and clean shoes. Darren said you can tell a lot about a person by how clean their shoes were. Second is punctuality. I told Darren to phone ahead, tell them we were going to be a little late. He said we'd be fine, he knew the area, and it was only going to be a couple of minutes. We sat in traffic behind a three-way stoplight put there for road works. When the cars finally moved, I was initially relieved, before seeing the road was closed in the opposite direction. I made a mental note to worry about that later. The car park was empty except for a single beat-up lime green beetle, rust crawling over it as if it were a disease. When we got out of the car I had to stop myself from swearing. I hadn't put on my tie. I'd usually park up and do that before arriving, presentation was the key. It's fine, I know the clients, we go way back, Darren said, smiling. I didn't like that, I felt naked. But I could see an older woman staring out of the window of the reception area. It was too late now, I'd been spotted. I opened the boot, slung my laptop over my shoulder, and heaved out the fax machine. I followed Darren in, he held open the door, then signed us in. He'd only recently come back to work from a serious heart attack, and today was the first day he'd not complained and asked to carry. He knew better than that now. She was still staring out of the window, the old woman, wearing a black dress and those glasses on a chain like a librarian would wear. "My husband won't be long, won't you take a seat?" she said, before turning and gingerly escaping into the office behind the desk. I put the fax machine on the floor. I never sat when waiting for a meeting. It puts you in an inferior position. You want to meet the client on the level. "You okay?" I said to Darren, whose hand shook as he put a small plastic cup under the water cooler and poured himself a drink. "Fine," he said, downing the glass. "New medication." I saw a bead of sweat roll down his forehead and disappear under his collar. His black tie was pulled taut around his neck, making his skin fold over. I wanted to tell him it was probably bad for his circulation, but he never listened to me. "Come on in," an old man said, as he poked his head around the doorframe. I lugged the fax machine in and placed it next to the chairs on the opposite side of the table. Darren introduced us. "Steve here has a great demo lined up for you. Now not only is the new model quicker than the last, it uses 50% less toner." "I don't want to know about that," the old man said. "I'm Ted and this is my wife Elsa. We want to know about you. We are thinking about changing suppliers, and the guys we saw yesterday were pretty convincing." "Okay," I said, suddenly feeling off balance. I had my routine, my patter, I had it honed. I wasn't used to ad-libbing a sales gig. "What do you want to know?" I said, leaning back, reaching for my tie and realizing it wasn't there. "We don't wear ties here, you're fine," Ted said, smiling at me. "How old are you?" "I'm 32, sir. Been doing this job for 10 years now." "Darren and I have been working together for, is it 5 years?" Darren nodded, and I noticed his face was no longer sweating. If anything, mine was. "Do you like each other?" "Yeah, he's been a great friend to me. He's going to be my best man, in a couple of months. I've told him not to arrange anything strenuous for the stag do." Ted looked over at Darren. "I had a heart attack recently. Steve was the one who gave me CPR, saved my life." "How wonderful, I mean, it's so nice you can be there for each other." "Are you a religious man, Steve?" Elsa asked. Well, I don't practice, but I believe there's a God, probably." "I mean, yeah, I believe in God." "That's good, we are very spiritual here." Elsa grabbed Ted's hand and squeezed. The conversation went on for another 10 minutes, where they continued to ask questions about my past and my family. Then one thing Elsa said took me off guard. "Have you ever killed a man?" "No, God no." "How do you know?" "I think I'd remember that," I said, reaching for my tie again. That damn thing had put me right off my game. "Maybe not directly, but have you thought about an interaction you may have had, like letting a car out of a junction, only for that car to be involved in a crash later on? It's almost certain that you've caused the death of someone, just by interacting with them." I didn't know what to say. I looked towards Darren for an answer. He shrugged his shoulders, his eyes wide, and shook his head. "I, never thought about it to be honest, ma'am." Elsa whispered into Ted's ear for a moment. "We'll use you, sorry to be so abrupt, but we have somewhere to be," Ted said, holding out his hand to shake mine. When we shook, I didn't say anything. I felt his tight grip, and the sweat from my hand transferred to his. "I'll write up the paperwork and get it over to you in the morning," Darren said, as he stood up. Almost in a daze, I picked up the fax machine. Darren held the doors open and I placed it in the boot, along with my laptop. "What the fuck was that?" I said to Darren, as I reversed out of the parking space. "A sale," he said. "They loved you. I knew they would. I'm very glad we do this together." But I didn't show them anything. "You didn't have to," you sold yourself, that's half the job, come on, you must have realized that before. From within, Ted and Elsa stared out of the window, their gazes vacant, but fixed on me. As we got to the junction, I saw the sign saying road closed. Damn it, I forgot about that, give me a minute, I said, reaching for the GPS. It's okay, Darren said, I know a way back. Turn left. Darren's sense of direction was terrible, but I was intrigued. We followed the road, going in the opposite direction to where we came from. Turn here, he said, pointing. That's a graveyard, I said, reading the sign that said cemetery, no through road, it says we can't. Trust me, he said, so I did. I slowed to a crawl, not wanting to disturb the dead that slept under the graves that lined both sides of the road. We were in the old section, all the stones were either broken or leaned heavily or both. We followed the road as it bore to the right. Every now and then, I saw a fresh bunch of flowers lie silently on the old grave sites. I wondered if the groundskeeper put them there, or distant relatives. I felt for the people who lay there forgotten, maybe they didn't have family anymore, or maybe they didn't care. It was then I knew I wanted to be cremated. As we drove further into the cemetery, I noticed a road that led out to the far side, though a metal gate stood in the way. How about we open that? I said. No, carry on, Darren replied, and I watched as the gate disappeared into the distance. Moments later we stopped. A line of cars in front of us didn't move. I think they have a funeral on. I looked behind and started to reverse. What are you doing? I'm going to go through that gate. I slammed on the brakes as a car came into view behind me. Fucking hell. We're going to have to go forward. It'll be fine, calm down. The cars in front had moved to the side now, parking up on the grass verges. Carefully, I pulled out, making sure not to drive on the grass to the right, and over countless grave sites. A man in a suit walked in front of us, and waved me to park up. Great, I said, he thinks we are here for the funeral. I ignored him, and gestured that I needed to pass. Calmly he walked over to the car, and I opened the window. Good morning, sir. Please park up on the space on the left. You're mistaken, we need to. Darren grabbed my arm. Just park up, when they're all gone, we can leave. Don't make a scene, people here will be grieving. I sighed and parked along the verge. What now? I asked. Come on, you're a salesman, you can pretend. You serious? He produced a mischievous grin, damn serious. We stood next to the car, and I felt out of place. You should put your tie on, Darren suggested. Really? It would look a little disrespectful not to. I shook my head, opened the boot and pulled out 3 ties. Shall I wear the red one with musical notes, the blue one with the paisley design, or this yellow number? I'd go with the blue one. For the first time ever, Darren standing there with his black tie, looked like the professional one. Why are you wearing a black tie? I said, as I frantically tried to remember a half-Windsor knot without a mirror. It's neutral. You're only supposed to wear them to funerals or dinner parties. Well, I'm not out of place today, am I? We continued to stand next to the car as we watched all the mourners leave theirs. This isn't right, I said, clasping my hands in front of me, trying to become the character I was portraying. More cars arrived, and the line of vehicles grew. Look at all these graves, I said, how many do you think have been visited in the last 5 years, or 30 years? Not many, I wouldn't have thought. I want to be cremated, I don't want to be forgotten. Make sure Susie knows. Me too. Yeah, I will. We stood in silence, seeing more people walk hand in hand towards the church. The man in the suit approached us. Please make your way, the ceremony will be starting soon. He placed his hand on my back and gently nudged me. Are we really doing this? It appears so, Darren said, and I could tell he was enjoying himself. What the fuck, surely this is disrespectful. We are two more people come to mourn the loss of a fellow human being, how can that be disrespectful? We can't walk this way, I said, as we approached some graves. The thought of walking over someone's eternal resting place made me shudder. We cut across the grounds and joined the main path that led to the church. Do you think they dig up the graves when they run out of space? I'd hope not. Look how many there are. I did some mental arithmetic, trying to get a guesstimate of the number of plots throughout the grounds. There has to only be around 500 to 700 plots here. How many people must have died over the past 100 years? Thousands. They must do it. I bet there's a mass grave of all the people who didn't pay a lot. From behind I heard a young woman cry. I turned to see her, a man. I assumed her spouse stared daggers at me. I'm sorry, I said. Her demeanor changed as she glanced at Darren. So sorry for your loss, he said to her. Thank you, she said, and the pair moved past us. What was that? I said in a whisper. Salesmanship, they don't know we aren't supposed to be here. We stopped as we reached the entrance to the church. We really doing this? I asked again. No turning back now. You are a really good friend. I laughed, not too loud as to look out of place. Remember to mention this in your best man speech. He smiled and put his hand on my shoulder. Along the main road leading to us we saw the hearse. Here we go, I said. Why did it have to happen now? He's so young, a woman said from behind. I didn't want to be rude, so I didn't turn. When it's your time, a man said. I'm going to miss him so much. Me too. It took an eternity for the hearse to stop in front of us. Another black car behind came to a halt and out stepped 5 men. Sir, could you help? The suited man said to Darren. Sure, what do you need? We only have 5 pallbearers. Would you be kind enough to help? I'd be honored, Darren replied. Excuse me, his health isn't great, let me do it. Nonsense, he said to me, I'm fine now, the doctors told me. They never expected you to carry a coffin. He gave me a glare that said, shut the fuck up, so I did. He never listened to me. All I could think about was how I was going to tell our manager Darren had another heart attack carrying a coffin on the way back from our meeting. How on earth could I explain that?